We'll now move on to the last and final team of the fellowship who are going to be presenting today, and that's Team Real Estate Alerter. So Real Estate Alerter is a collaboration between journalists and technologists from Hearst and Gannett in the US, Globe and Mail in Canada, and E24 in Norway. They are developing an algorithm to detect newsworthy real estate transactions from datasets. So to speak about this, we have with us today Zahra from the Globe and Mail and Andreas from E24.
Thank you, Lakshmi, and hello to everyone around the world. I want to start by telling the origin story behind this project, and we have created like a Gen AI video to reconstruct the event. It's taking place in Detroit, and the main character here is Randy Essex. He's a Detroit Free Press editor.
It is a beautiful Detroit morning. A Free Press editor is out running. Suddenly, he sees a sign so shocking.
And the shocking sign that Randy Essex saw there was a property in near the Michigan train station for sale for $2 million, and he thought, "Wow, why have nobody picked up that news story?" So he ran back to the newsroom, and he made sure that there was an article written, and this article was one of the most read news stories that week. And this also prompted a question by one of the team members, Anne Jeanette, and she was thinking there must be like a more efficient way than running all around Detroit City to find the newsworthy real estate transactions. So maybe this is something we could automate using AI. So there's so many transactions going on every day, but how do we find the ones that are actually worth to write about? And that's what our project is about. And we are the Real Estate Alerter team. So you have here to the right, you have Zahra, who's presenting together with me from the Mail and Globe. The Globe and Mail, sorry, and you have Amelie from Gannett, and you have my colleague Hans-Jørgen in E24, Patrick, also from the Globe and Mail, and Jeanette, now at Hearst, Connecticut. And then there's myself, I'm at E24 in Norway. So of course the seed that was planted by Randy was planted in fertile soil because real estate is an important news beat that creates lots of user engagement, and I think that's true of all our newsrooms, and I think it's true of many of your newsrooms too. And that's probably because real estate is an important part of people's economy and everybody's daily life. So it's kind of like if you have a house, you're invested in real estate somehow. And real estate, that's also power and a place to store, grow, and potentially also to hide your money. And what's certain is that we know that we are missing out on good stories. So to remedy that, we build the real estate alerter. So here we are waiting for yeah, so here there's a Slack bot alerting us that there are new newsworthy transactions, and now we can see 7 new newsworthy transactions, and then we can open the dashboard, and into the dashboard we can then see all the transactions that are there with a description for why the LLM is meaning that this is a newsworthy transaction. And then we can filter based if there's a celebrity involved in the transaction on the price per square meter and also like the whole transaction price. So that's kind of like the main tool, but and it's starting to become fairly good, but it's not yet perfect. And that's why we need to continue to improve it. And let's see if we have the next video. Yes, there you have Christian Eriksen, and he's a famous Danish football player, but he wouldn't have bought a property in this district in Oslo. I'm quite certain. Christian Eriksen is also a very common Norwegian name, and this is one of the challenges I will talk more about later. But what we can do in the tool is when we have false positives, we can give feedback, and we can use that feedback then later to fine-tune the system that we have created. So this is a good way for treating the false positives, but also we need to take care of the false negatives because we won't miss out of news stories because the LLM are deeming the transactions to be non-newsworthy. So that's why we have built a filter for non-newsworthy transactions, and then the journalists can go through quickly and they can see if there is something there sticking out that's deemed non-newsworthy by the LLM, but that actually is a newsworthy transaction that we should consider. So that's the product. And now Zahra is going to talk more about the approach that we took.
Yeah, so in the next few slides, we will talk more about the technical details of our approach. This is the block diagram of our system, and I will talk about the main components. In anomaly detection, using domain knowledge, statistical analysis, and clustering, we find outliers within the dataset. Then we pre-process these structured data outliers into a more natural language format to be easily digestible by LLM. We also enrich that with external information, for example, regarding geographical areas that are mentioned in the database, what they are known for, and hence what can be considered unusual about them. We then have the LLM, which we rely on for deciding which of those outliers are actually newsworthy. We start directing LLM by few-shot prompting, but we have also embedded a human feedback in the loop in order for LLM to be able to constantly align itself with the human experts that are actually using the system. Last but not the least, we have the famous person feature, which we came up with a little after we started this project. Using named entity recognition on archive data, we will extract a sorted list of famous people, and we will enrich our feature set with this feature. We have some challenges here that we will talk about shortly. The main challenge, and maybe also the motivation behind this project, is that the answer to this question is not that clear to us. What makes a transaction newsworthy? Now, you might ask that, okay, we decided to use the LLM, so why do we need to answer this question, or at least partly answer this question? Because the LLM needs basically direction from us and relies on it. I will give you a very simple example. In our experiments, LLM tended to flag transactions with contamination in the ground as newsworthy. But upon investigation, we found out that in the Oslo database that we are dealing with, that event is not so rare to be newsworthy, although it might be in another region in the world. So you can see how LLM actually can, like if we do not direct it correctly, it can give us so many false positives. So yes, we have the human feedback in the loop, but we are starting from a cold start. We didn't have any feedback at the beginning. And so we conducted some interviews with real estate reporters. We gave them a list of features, and we asked them to weight these features based on how much they can contribute to the newsworthiness of a transaction. Now, you can imagine how complicated it can get, and it actually did. And even within our team, it was very hard to decide on what makes a transaction newsworthy. That's why we focused on price and involvement of a famous person in the transaction as two features that stood out in those interviews, and also we all agreed on them. We focused on these two features in our few-shot prompting. And at this point, we were so certain about these features making a transaction newsworthy that we have a rule-based backup algorithm in place in case LLM misses such transactions. But actually, with more and more feedback, we have observed that LLM misses less and less of such newsworthy transactions. We started with a small data set, and we had promising results, and then we had access to this richer data set. We were excited, but as usual, we had this challenge of noisy data set, too much cleaning up needed, too much figuring things out, feature engineering. And at the end of the day, it turned out that the results are not as much better as we expected. Now, it can be the case that all of these features, extra features, were useless and just distracting, or, and we think probably the or is true, the more complicated the feature set, the more complicated our directions to the LLM should be in order for the LLM to not be confused. And maybe that can only be achieved through fine-tuning.
And then the third challenge that we had was with the famous person list. So because when we write about Lady Gaga, it's not that easy to find Lady Gaga in the transaction data. lots of the people we write about, they use stage names, but we need their legal name to be able to find them in the transaction data. So that's a one issue. And the other issue is when you have a famous James Smith, how do you find this James Smith among all other James Smiths? So to try to come up with a solution here, we used Wikidata and had some positive tests there. So when querying Lady Gaga, we get her legal name back, and we also get a date of birth. And date of birth is also very useful to kind of narrow down the many James Smiths into the James Smith that we are looking for. And if you're famous enough, that would work. But also in Norway, we have the tax registry data that we could query for also to get the date of birth of a person so we can match in the data. So actually we got Julia Roberts popping up in the Oslo transactions, and that would have been a great story if it would be this Julia Roberts, but unfortunately not. Over to the learnings. So one of the main learning is to focus on the question. It's really easy when you work on when you kind of have a solution from the start and you keep like drilling down on it, but then you're missing out on other opportunities. So for us, always going back to what's kind of the main question here, and the main question is what it is actually that makes a real estate transaction newsworthy. And we kept coming back to famous people. If there are a known person involved in the transaction, that's something that we need to pick up. And I think this famous person list is also one of the most promising outcomes of this fellowship. An example here is a famous cross-country star who wanted to sell her villa. Our competitor, Finansavisen, picked up this story. Then sometime after, her villa was actually sold for a lot less money than what she wanted for it. And nobody picked up that story, but our system picked it up later with test data. So it's something we missed out on, but with a real estate alerter, we would not have missed out on that.
One important learning that we had on the technical side was that GenAI plus human feedback can be a promising approach for detecting newsworthiness in real estate data. Only with few-shot prompting, we have observed considerable boost in the performance. And so we expect that with the human feedback that we have in the loop, the LLM will be able to align itself more and more with the opinion of the human experts that are using the system.
And then moving forward, like our system is still a bit tape and glue, so we need to set up a proper pipeline and alert system. We have only worked on the Norwegian data so far, so we also want to scale this to the US and Canadian data, even though there are some differences in data availability. Also, there are like different standards of newsworthiness depending on if you're a local paper or a national paper, and to make the system adaptable to different standards of newsworthiness is something we think will be very useful. The famous person list is also a feature we want to improve on. For example, creating a UI so that the journalist can access and edit the list. So far, we've been looking mostly at the individual transaction, but going forward, looking at patterns to see if there are newsworthy stories there. For example, watching for people or companies buying up lots of property over time. That's probably going to be interesting. And now that we have had quite a good success with LLM, with the approach of using LLM to detect newsworthiness, could this also be useful for other data sets? That's something that we would like to figure out as well. And that was the presentation. Thank you all for your attention. This is the team. And one more click. And also thank you to Randy. All right.
Great. Thanks, Andreas, and thanks, Zahra. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box. And I know there are some questions that have already come in. One was actually in the chat, but I'm just going to take it because I happened to notice it. So please, if either of you could answer, where do you get your data from? And also, if you could just say what was the difficulty in accessing that data?
Yeah, I can start with that. Luckily, I'm based in Norway, and Norway is very open when it comes to data. So we actually we buy a daily transaction list where we have all the transactions from all over Norway. In the US, there's also data available, but then you have to get it usually at state level, and it's also more expensive. And in Canada, it's very difficult to get the data actually. But something that we are hoping for is that if we can make journalism with impact here, then maybe we can put pressure on other countries as well to open up for data. But yeah, unfortunately, it depends a bit on where you are based. But another approach as well is to look at listings instead of transactions, and that is probably more open in most countries, I would assume.
Thanks, Andreas. And now I'm going to move to the Q&A box in case both of you also want to take a look at it. The first question is from Phil, who's asking, could this tool track property portfolios of celebrities across different territories?
Okay, so we don't have this feature right now in the system, but I can tell you that, for example, when I was reviewing about like 500 transactions that went through the system, 500 outliers, I was able to notice a few celebrities buying multiple properties, like even with a very simple review. As Andreas mentioned, one of the next steps that we want to take is finding out patterns. And one of the most important patterns is basically people or companies buying a bunch of like properties. So that will basically be under the category of finding out patterns in the data. And because we do have those transactions, newsworthy transactions with all the descriptions, we can have a structured way of finding out patterns and then categorizing them. For example, the ones that are under one person's name, we do have that column. And so, yes, that can be done. It's not part of the system at the moment, but it's one of the future steps.
I think just to add, I think like lots of the power here is to combine different data sets as well. And now we are combining like the famous person list into the transaction data, but there's no reason that it could be the other way around as well. So yeah, absolutely something that's worthwhile to look into.
Thank you both. And the next question is from Patrick, who's asking how you integrate the human feedback into the LLM.
Okay, so the way that it will be, as Andreas mentioned, the pipeline has not been like operational for the newsrooms yet. It has been just internally used by us. But once it is operational, then we will have a set of labeled data. For example, we do have some LLM outputs. It is newsworthy or it is not newsworthy, and they will each of them have basically label yes or no by an editor who has reviewed that, and then it can be used for fine-tuning the system. And then from that time on, we will be using that fine-tuned LLM for the next transactions.
Thanks, Zahra. And then the next question is from Claire, who says, what was your source of information for Norwegian house transactions?
We are getting our data from a company called Ambita, who's actually like the data is open and free, but then we have to go through many sources and do lots of cleaning. So Ambita is doing quite a bit of that work, and they are providing like daily updates on transaction data.
Super. I think Claire also has a follow-up question, which is, were you just interested in this transaction, not the initial announcement or a property is for sale?
Yeah, we're absolutely interested in both. We started with the transactions because we had the data available there, but also looking at listings and also like the combination of listing and transaction. So what is the property listed for, and then what is it sold for later? That's also journalistic value in that. So it's another possible thing to look at in the future.
Super. Gustavo and Johan have similar questions, I feel, but feel free to answer them separately if you think so. Do you think this could be adapted to art market purchases? And is the famous person list something that can be useful in other journalistic areas as well?
Yeah, I could start with the first. Probably, if you have good data in the art market, then you could probably use the same approach there as well. I'm not that familiar with the art market data, but I assume so. And yeah, and the other one about the famous person list, if that's something that could be useful in other journalistic areas, definitely. I think real estate transactions, it is just one data set that this is interesting for, but kind of with fame comes some kind of power as well, and yeah, important for us as journalists to be able to check on them in a way.
Zahra?
Yeah, I would just add one thing, which is like as mentioned in our future steps was expanding to other data sets and also but what I can say is that this project gave us a lot of insights that those insights I'm sure that can be generalized. Now, one data set might have enough features for us to be able to expand this project to that. But now we have like a tool set of like insights to like not waste our time anymore. Like we can just go right into the point that can be useful for this approach and see if it works or not in a specific field or a data set.
Thanks, Zahra. Last two questions. One is, have you found or faced any issues with privacy? Do you anticipate these?
One issue internally was kind of like sharing like data on persons in between different companies. So we found a way of avoiding that. But the tool itself is built for like journalistic purposes, and it's an internal tool, and we are using our editorial judgment as to which stories we are actually surfacing towards the users. So yeah, I think we have covered that quite well.
Thanks. And the last question is, in UK, properties owned by offshore companies are a big story. Can you look at this in the future? And maybe if you expand upon it, what else are you going to do with this tool in the future?
Well, I think to answer the question first, this is probably like of course, yeah, this would be very interesting to do, but it's probably also a bit difficult to do. So we will have to see. I definitely see the value in this. First of all, now it's like kind of like getting the tool up and flowing and getting it into use in the newsroom, and then also kind of like go through the list of next steps that I went through earlier in the presentation. I think that's the first things. But I thank you for all like the great questions and ideas as to how we can move forward with this. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you very much, everyone, for listening,
Awesome.
for all the questions.
Thank you, Zahra, and thank you, Andreas. Great presentation, and as always, great work with this entire project for you and the team.